Hello, colleagues. I'm Camille Hamawi. I teach psychology at WCC, and I'm co-chair of the Faculty Senate Assessment Committee. In this video, I'd like to show you some principles of how to grade with rubrics. I've outlined 5 steps. The first is to identify the student learning outcomes to be measured. In step 2, you assign weightings to the outcomes. Step 3, identify levels of achievement and assign numerical scores. Step 4 involves describing the levels of achievement used for evaluation. And in step 5, computing the total score. You'll find that once you get used to grading with rubrics, you save time. You could grade quicker, give better feedback to students, and your grading overall is more consistent and more fair. So student learning outcomes. Here's an example of 3 outcomes for a hypothetical paper on critical thinking. Describe factors shaping the author's point of view. Summarize information presented in support of the author's conclusion and evaluate the author's argument, identifying assumptions that is based upon. So this is what you want the student to get out of the assignment. And it's good to tell students in the instructions for the assignment what the outcomes are. It could be at the very outset of the instructions. Here's what I expect you will learn from this assignment. Then in the rubric, you directly evaluate those same outcomes. So here's the beginning of a rubric. And you can see here in the first column, I have the outcomes listed in shorthand. Identification of point of view, that's the first one. Summary of information, the second. And evaluation of the argument, the third. So in the rubric itself, you could use shorthand, but you do want to spell out the student learning outcomes in your instructions to the assignment. Note that the outcomes use measurable language, these action verbs. It's not understand factors, it's describe factors. The next step is to assign weightings. So you decide how much each outcome will be worth as a percentage of the total rubric score. You want it to sum to 100. So in this example, identifying the point of view is 20%, summarizing the information 30%, and evaluation of the argument 50%. So this last standard is weighted more heavily because it's your judgment. But in the case of this example, this is thought to be something that's more important for the student to learn. So those are the weightings. And then you need to specify the levels of achievement. You need to decide how you will categorize and name different levels of achievement of the outcomes. I like to use verbal labels that correspond closely to the grading system we use at WCC. So excellent corresponds to A grades, B good to B grades, C to satisfactory, and D and F to below satisfactory. So those are verbal labels that I like to use, but there are other possibilities. You could have exceeds expectations, meets expectations, does not meet expectations. So ultimately you decide what you think works best for you. And then you assign scores or score ranges for each level of achievement. So in this first example here, you have a 1, 2, 3, or a 4. So if the student meets the outcome at the excellent level, a 4 is assigned, and so forth. Now, if you set up a rubric in Blackboard, you could be more precise with the scoring, more flexible with the scoring. For example, you could use score ranges or even percentage ranges. So for an excellent, you could have a range of 90 to 100% of this 20% weighting of that outcome towards the rubric score. So if the student's at the excellent level, you could give 100 or a 90 or a 95 or a 93. You could choose any score in that range. So it gives you more flexibility, and hence you could more finely discriminate between different levels within one performance category. This would be difficult to do if you're doing it by hands because the calculation is going to be more complex. But if you set it up in Blackboard, the score calculations are automated. The next step, identify the standards you will use to evaluate student work. And here's a listing of different standards we could use to evaluate students' thinking as demonstrated in their writing or their speech. Accuracy, the concepts are described correctly, the information is empirically supported. Completeness, thoroughness, all relevant factors are considered. Precision, the information is presented at the appropriate level of exactness. Clarity, the ideas are readily understood. Breadth, different theoretical or personal points of view are considered. Depth, the complexity of the issue is acknowledged. Many factors are considered. Logic, the ideas are connected in a way that makes sense. Relevance, the ideas and information presented are on topic. Significance, the information and ideas presented are the most important ones to consider. And fairness, the argument is presented in an objective, non-judgmental way. So these are things we look for. These are standards of high quality thinking as expressed in writing or speech that we use when we grade student work. The next step is to write descriptions for the different levels of achievement. So that's what you see here. Now it's been fully fleshed out. So identifying the point of view. What is excellent performance? Several 3+ personal factors in the author's theoretical perspective are clearly, precisely, and accurately identified and described. Note that you have those standards there in the description: clarity, precision, and accuracy. If the student's at the good level, the explanation of relevant factors could be expanded upon with greater precision, or the wording is unclear at times. So there's some weaknesses with clarity and precision. Satisfactory level, the author's theoretical perspective is accurately described, but personal factors are not discussed. So it's not complete. It's lacking in that standard. And below satisfactory, the author's theoretical perspective is not accurately identified. There's an accuracy weakness. Personal factors are touched upon, but the explanations are lacking in detail. And here you see the descriptions for the two other outcomes in the rubric: summary of information and evaluation of argument. I'm not going to read through all of it. Let me read through the excellent level for summary of information. All the relevant information in the article is clearly, precisely, and accurately summarized. So relevance, that's a standard in this description: clarity, precision, and accuracy. Good level, the information is accurately summarized, though the descriptions could be more precise. Accuracy is there, precision is lacking. So the descriptions have these standards within them, the standards you use for evaluation. The next step is to compute the total score. So you make a judgment. If you have a more simple scoring scheme, just one score for each performance level, you would assign a 3 for identification of point of view, a 4 for excellent, a 2 for evaluation of argument in this example. And then how do you compute the score? It's a weighted average, shown here. The total score is a 3, and that's weighted at 20%. That's the point of view. They got a 4 for summary of information and a 2 for evaluation of argument. It's a weighted average. Do the math. You get a 2.8 as the score on the rubric. As I said earlier, if you set this up in Blackboard, it does it automatically. And you could use percentage ranges instead of single scores. There's more opportunity to fine-tune it when it's automated. And one last thing. A rubric score by itself might not tell you much. The scale might be arbitrary, so you could convert that raw score, the rubric score, to a percentage score or a letter grade. And here's an example of a conversion chart. So if your rubrics had scores ranging from a 0 to 4, then you could have the following conversions. So these raw scores correspond to these percentage scores. 3.5 is a 90, a 3.6 is a 92, etc. And if you want to enter a letter grade or assign a letter grade, all these scores here are A level. In the example I provided, 2.8 was the rubric score. That corresponds to an 83 as a percentage. I could enter that in the grade book. And that corresponds to a B level grade. So those are the principles of how to construct a rubric. And like I mentioned, once you do this, you're going to get better and better at doing it. And your grading is going to become more efficient, quicker, more consistent, more fair for the student. And the student will get more feedback so they know how to improve their work and their learning in the course. So that brings me to the end of this tutorial video.